Good morning and happy Friday to all of you. It has been quite a while since I've been on here with Extraordinary Stories with Extraordinary People. I took a little bit of a break, but we are back. And just if this is your first time ever watching, welcome. My name is Amy Kochek with Amy Kochek Creative. I am a writing coach. I'm an editor. I'm a ghostwriter. I am all things story related. Stories are what make me passionate. Stories are our most powerful asset. They're the most powerful asset that you possess. So, it's what gets me excited. So, in my journey of telling stories and helping other people tell theirs through the written word, I've met some pretty incredible people along the way. And I always ask, like, why aren't you sharing your story? And of course, people are on a daily basis, but I know that so many people have books inside of them. They have podcasts inside of them. They have something to share that is just so impactful to so many people's lives. So when I meet people like that, I get super excited, and I decided to use my social media platform as an opportunity and as a space for people to come on and just share their stories with each other, with us, and have gotten a lot of really great feedback. Thank you to all of you who have given me feedback on some of the stories and the impact that it's left and the ideas you've gotten and the encouragement. So it's been really great. So I am going to jump right into today because I'm so super excited about my guest today. His name is Fabiano Mannino. I hope I said that right.
Perfect.
Fabiano is local to St. Pete, and got to meet him and sit down and talk about part of his story recently. And just got so excited because I believe that this is sharing a perspective that sometimes goes ignored or maybe isn't shared enough in society today. So, Fabiano, I'm really excited to have you on today. Thank you so much for being here. And we're just going to jump right into it. So, first of all, tell us who you are, any relevant information you want to share about your life.
Well, first of all, thank you, Amy, for holding this space for me and allowing me to send my message to whoever possible it can help. So I appreciate you for that. And basically, so again, my name's Fabiano Mannino. I was born in Trenton, New Jersey, and I've lived in Florida pretty much my entire life. I was only up there for 5 years, but um, relevant stuff. Um, so far, within the last few months, I've created a movement within St. Pete, and it's been pretty beautiful. But I'll touch more on that towards the end. And it's been nothing short of incredible, just the amount of support that I've been receiving from everybody. So, um, yeah, relevant. Right now, I'm a clinical education specialist for a medical device company. So I teach surgeons in orthopedics and sports medicine. And I also started my own conscious men's coaching practice as well, and amongst a few other things that are in the works. So I'm just excited to be here.
Very cool. Okay, so I'm really excited to talk about the conscious man movement. But before we get into that, we're gonna really hit on the pivotal moment that kind of led you to that. So before you get into the actual pivotal moment, set us up. Who were you? What were you doing? And then take us to the pivotal moment. What was that thing that happened that changed the trajectory of your life?
So my preface to the pivotal moment is I was 21 years old. I was in the fire academy and going to school to be a firefighter. And I met a woman who, I want to say, changed my life at that time. And ended up getting married to her very young. She was from Brazil. So it's like um, one of those things where either she left or she stayed in the country, and I didn't want her to leave. So I'd been with her for about a year and a half at that time. So um, I did what I thought was the right thing, and I married her, and with the intention of actually having a wedding later on, and started going through this life, and I was just like, all right, so something just wasn't jiving the entire time, but I didn't know any better. I didn't have really any guidance to realize like what I needed to do in a relationship like this. And I was kind of just like going through the motions, And so I was pretending to be this mold of a man who she wanted me to be. And that that was not the right move on my part, because you can only keep that up for so long. Like I wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary. I was just like I was always this like kind, compassionate, loving, nurturing man, but I was it was like her mold of that. And so I started to realize that I was getting like going down this dark path. I never like saw my friends. I never got to hang out with them. It was a lot of her life, and I was just like inside of it. So um, I started to change, and I started to want to do things for myself, and go back to school and to learn more, because while I was going through the fire academy, I had the support of her. But after I graduated, I didn't, and it was either your career or me, and so I chose her. And then I started to get really depressed and started to realize, like, having these bad thoughts in my head. And come around 2014, we were going through marriage counseling, and I started to understand and realize that this was never going to change. This is something that was never going to change in like my entire life, that I had pre-planned in my head, and following that mold of what my parents did, and get married young, have kids young, have a job, do what I can to support my family, was not in the cards for me at that time. So um, I chose myself over my marriage, because the alternative was not ideal for anybody else.
Yeah.
So um, that's, yeah, I decided to start my life over from there.
Yeah. So let's rewind for a minute
Hmm.
to the idea of losing yourself in a relationship. Is this something that you realized that started in your marriage, or is this something that was a norm for you in your other relationships and just became even more magnified in your marriage? Is this like a trend in your life?
So this is something I didn't realize until more recently, is that I was reliving the same situation just with a different face.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just progressively got more and more painful until, like I said, as of more recent, I started to realize, like, this isn't this isn't going to change unless I do.
Yeah. What was your moment? Because I know a lot of people can probably relate to this with the idea of losing yourself in relationships and
Hmm.
not really knowing who you are, so becoming who you think the other person wants you to be.
Yeah.
When is that moment where you look in the mirror and you realize I've lost myself? Like, when was that awakening moment?
Mm. When I no longer knew who I was, because the pretend me wasn't good enough and the real me wasn't good enough. So I didn't know who I was supposed to be. I always tried to fit in with wherever I was at, instead of loving myself and understanding like who I am as a man is more than enough, and what I can provide is more than enough.
Yeah.
Because like I had that moment where I was just like, I am enough.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those things where we're not taught this as men. To we're not There is no guidance, especially if there's a lack of guidance, growing up. Like, we don't have these initiation processes, these ritualistic processes that other cultures have. So it's a very difficult to have mentors from a very young age, and I didn't have that growing up. I had a very loving father, but I didn't have the guidance that I needed. I didn't have the support that I needed, and this is something that I actually talked to him about at the beginning of this year. Like, once I realized, like, all my problems were stemming from childhood, and the lack of guidance and the lack of emotion that was shown.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about your real self and then the self that you created, What do you
Hmm.
feel like was the big difference between who you really were and the person you created yourself to be?
Because I wasn't doing it for anybody else. I was just doing it for myself. I was doing it because it's what made me happy. I wasn't doing it because it made Susie Joe or whoever,
Yeah.
whatever random name I could think of. It was just because I felt no emotional pull, like no like that gut wrenching feeling where you know it's not the right thing.
Hmm.
That, there's none of that anymore. This is who I am. This is exactly who I'm supposed to be, and I've been able to finally come into who I am as a man in this society and help other men see that about themselves as well.
Yeah. So, what did that journey look like for you? So, once you got to the point of saying, no more,
Hmm.
I'm going to start living for myself and being the real version of me, what did that journey look like? How did you figure that out for yourself?
So that's been 5 years in the making. So there's been quite a bit that's happened within those 5 years. The first step was obviously getting divorced, and then figuring out where to go from there. And I moved back to St. Pete. This was definitely different than when I was growing up because this was not the same area that it was then. So I moved downtown, and I was just kind of like floating through life. I didn't really have a purpose. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just trying. I didn't have a career at the time, and didn't exactly know where I was going. So I just started trying a bunch of different things, and I ended up finding music festivals. And it's funny because if you knew me before before these 5 years, I didn't. I was afraid to dance. I was afraid to be like who I was because I didn't know who I was. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I ended up finding music festivals, and with that, I found drugs as well. And um, one of the things that was very different for me was they made me feel again because for a while I was pretty numb, and I didn't understand it like at the time. Like I was just doing it because it made me feel good and I was able to connect with people. But then once I started to realize and really realize like what I was doing, I I had another pivotal moment um, in 2017 where I was driving down to Howard Franklin. It was 10:45 at night, and I fell asleep going 70 miles an hour. And I woke up and I hit a pickup truck, which threw me into the wall. And then I started, I went up into the air and I literally saw like my life slow down. And I didn't realize what it was at the time, but it was my brain, my preparing me for my death, pretty much. And there's that slow release of dimethyltryptamine, DMT, that we produce. And basically, I just saw like everything slow down. And I was going into the water, and then my car just turned back onto the Howard Franklin, and I came to like a screeching complete halt, and my window shattered. I hit my head on the steering wheel. I had a slight concussion, and I got out of the car with a bruised knee, a bruised elbow, and shoulder. Obviously, that concussion was still there, and I looked around, and the water was so calm that night, and I just you could hear everything, and I just cried. I just broke out in tears because like a voice just came through my head, and it was just like, "You're meant for more than this."
Mm-hmm.
Like, shape the fuck up, pretty much.
Yeah.
Um, so that happened, and then I took a, I really took a look at my life, and I just started to really slow down with everything that I was doing. And then a few months later, I became a godfather, which is a pretty big deal in the Italian culture. So I had a lot more to live for. My niece is now, geez, almost 2.5. Wow, time is flying.
Yeah.
Um, And so, yeah, I just started to look at things a lot more and I started to journal. I started like having these thoughts come through my head. And then, like, fast forward a year, like, I'm starting to really just understand who I am. And I'm posting my stuff on social media and I'm getting a lot of like good response, a lot of good traction. And I wasn't really doing it for anybody else. I was doing it for myself because that was my outlet. That was me just putting my thoughts on the paper and just putting it out there. Like, because this thing can be very tricky sometimes.
Yeah.
It could be your best friend or your worst enemy. So um, I just started doing the work. I started really realizing that this is helping people. It's really helping people. And then another, I would say another pivotal moment or my realization was I had another woman come into my life. And this is when shit really started to make sense to me, is that I was still like, even with all this, even with that finding yourself
Hmm.
um, mentality, like I was like, yeah, I found myself. And this life was like, no, you haven't. You're not even close.
Hmm.
And so one thing I started to realize is that you're never truly finding yourself because you're constantly doing it every single day. This is more of a recent understanding of myself. And this woman came into my life and made me question everything. Like every single insecurity that I've ever had came out. And instead of asking, why is this happening to me? I started asking myself, what am I supposed to be learning from this? Like, what haven't I learned yet? Because being 31, you think you know it all. Or 30 at the time, but um, you think you know everything, and it's just like far from the truth. It's humbling
Yeah.
because we're constantly learning. So um, that was like an emotional roller coaster that I was going through, and very, very, very beautiful person, and she taught me so much, and I'm just so grateful for everything, and um, still learning.
I want to talk specifically about as you're learning and as you're coming to this deep self awareness, you start to really be pulled towards helping other men who are going through the same transition that you're going through. How did that come about? And then how did you kind of start putting structure to that to
Hmm.
actually start a movement to help men become more conscious and aware?
So at the beginning of this year, I started actually speaking about this stuff more, like just being vulnerable with whoever. I started putting myself out there, just whatever happens, this is who I am. Judge me for that, whatever, I don't care. And I was still kind of battling back and forth with, should I be sharing this stuff? Like, this isn't normal. People don't do this. Those thoughts in your head, and then just like, fuck it, whatever. Like, this is who I am. And I started to realize, like, after having these conversations with other men and seeing the way that they open up, and like, there's always that guard first. Can I trust this person? Like, can I trust this man with my deepest, darkest emotions and my secrets and everything? And they started to realize that I had nothing to hide. Like, this is this is me. And once I started to speak out about this, the amount of vulnerability and courage and strength that it took for them to speak about this, about things that they've gone through in their life, and they said that no one's talking about this, no one's doing anything about it. I mean, you have people here and there that are writing books, but it's not like Lewis Howes. He wrote Masks of Masculinity, which is an incredible book for men and women to read. So um, once I started to realize that we're all just wearing masks and we all just want to be accepted and loved for who we are and not be conditioned by what society deems as normal, um, I just started to speak out about it more. I went to a conference in March in Phoenix, Arizona, called High Performance Academy Live, and we would break out into small groups. There's like 2,000 of us, and we break out into small groups and start talking. And I would always want to go last, but then I started to realize that like people were actually asking me a lot of questions. Like more of the men were asking than the women were like, how can we support like the men in our lives, and I started to really realize like what I was actually doing. And then I came back home and still was like still iffy. Once you leave a conference, you're just like, oh, that conference high is gone. Okay, so now I got to like implement it into my life and all this other stuff. And so it was interesting. I had a catalyst moment that just like really sparked everything. And I've been telling people and I've been writing about it for a very long time that nobody can give you more love than you can give yourself. But actually feeling it like rush through your body was an incredible experience. Like actually feeling it, believing it, understanding it, that it's just like that's all we are, is pure beings of love. And that through all the layers and all the bullshit and all the whatever that you want to put up, like deep down, everybody just wants to be loved for who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the same for men. It's the same thing for men. We are emotional beings. Yes, it's I know it's a novelty, but
Yeah.
um teaching men to understand their emotions. That is something that I've really come into. It's like, why are these coming up? Like, what are these? Because we're not taught. We're not, like I said, there are no ritualistic processes in westernized culture, like there are in Indonesian cultures and the Mayan cultures and anything like that. So it was understanding that these men don't know what's coming up. That's why there's anger, there's frustration, there's sadness, there's love. This is a roller coaster. It's an epidemic. It's something that needs to be put on the forefront because like we have the power to help lead the people in our lives and the women in our lives, the men, the families, everybody, and just to understand that they don't control you. I've been saying it's like Jesus walking on water, or water represents emotion. He walked above his emotions. He didn't let them control him. He understood them. He identified them. That's a big one. It's like, okay, who are you? Why are you here? What are you trying to teach me? It's really, really being objective about it. It's like in the moment too. So it's amazing to see like these men doing the work for themselves, and because they want to show up for the people in their life. They want to have better relationships. They want to be able to communicate better, make love better, everything better.
Yeah. So what would you say through this whole scenario, I mean, you've mentioned, touched on multiple pivotal moments, and this is probably going to be difficult, but what would you say is the one big takeaway that you've had through this situation?
Well, going back to my divorce was you're never going to be good enough for the wrong person.
Mm,
And something I really had to realize was like who I am throughout all of this, throughout everything, is enough for the right person.
yeah. So
You know,
what would you say? What would you say to somebody who's watching this that maybe they're having a similar struggle, whether that be they're in a relationship and realizing that they're having to be somebody they're not, or they just see themselves walking through life and feeling like they lost themselves? What would be a piece of advice or a word of encouragement you could give them?
we're here. We're here doing the work. So come join us because we're teaching men how to communicate better. We're teaching them how to understand their emotions. We're letting them have an outlet in a safe space. Like that's what this really has created is a network of men who are holding space for each other, who are able to not pass judgment, to just let them heal and learn about themselves, and to create this healthy environment, this conscious environment. Like these men are aware that there's an issue, and that's huge because that's the first step. You can't force anybody into wanting to do this kind of work. Like they got to want to do it for themselves. They have to have their own pivotal moment where they're just like, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah. So my last question,
Mhm.
as women who are watching this, and sometimes we can be bent towards being controlling. How do we support the men in our lives that maybe are, looking to find themselves or struggling with identifying and dealing with their emotions? How do we hold space for them? How do we support them without suffocating them?
That takes a very strong, conscious woman. That's that's the thing about this. It's like they have to understand first, and just patience is huge. Patience is big because this isn't something that can be rushed. It's years and years and years of conditioning, and now it's like it's just starting to come to the surface. So, um, having like offering like groups like this, the things that we've started here, and hey, this is something that might interest you. I don't know, like I've been seeing something like the conversations that we've been having are, you don't have these with other men. You kind of revert back to who you are, and like that old school locker room talk and that toxic masculinity. And I just had a conversation the other day with a couple, and just seeing the way that they were communicating, she told me afterwards that they haven't had that kind of a conversation over 3 years of knowing each other. And so, like, they were about to call it quits, and like they just started talking, and it's just like opened up into this beautiful blossoming thing. And I'm starting to realize that this is can help save relationships. It is helping save relationships, and
Yeah.
opening up the lines of communication. Like, that's the thing. It's you're already holding space. Women do it very well, very, very well. It's the men that need to learn how to do it.
Yeah.
So,
I love that. Well, Fabiano, thank you so, so much for joining us today. Thank you for your vulnerability, your wisdom.
thank you.
Thank you for your story. Now, I do want you to share with us, how do people contact you, especially local to the St. Pete, Tampa Bay area? Because I know you
Hmm.
have like your meetups for the conscious male. So how do people contact you who are local that may want to be a part? And then how do people contact you who maybe aren't local, but it's a male that's struggling with their own identity, or a woman who wants more information on how to help the men in her life? How do people get in contact with you?
So I created a group on Facebook called Conscious Men of St. Pete, Florida. I'm not sure if it's going to really stay Conscious Men of St. Pete, Florida, because it is getting bigger. So I might change it, but that's what it is for right now. Again, I'm the only Fabiano Mannino on Facebook. Interesting enough. And on Instagram as well. So it's I don't know if I should spell it out, but it's
I'm gonna put
Fabio.
it. Yeah, I'm gonna put it in the comments. So
Oh, perfect.
I'll put your links in the comments, so people can
Okay.
get in contact with you.
Yeah, so it's Fabiano underscore Mannino on Instagram. And then let's see, anything else? I'm creating a group called the Conscious Men's Collective on Instagram as well. And I'm hoping, I'm creating some structure
Yeah,
at
yeah,
the moment. There's a lot that's been happening really fast. So I'm just getting ahead, and I'm just like, all right, let's do this.
yeah. I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing, and as always, thank you all for watching, for being a part of this conversation. Please, please connect with Fabiano. Especially if you are a male and you're going through that journey, you don't have to do it alone. And this is my main reason and driver for doing what I'm doing, is that depression, anxiety, the things that torture us mentally, a lot of times are steeped in the idea that we're alone. We convince ourselves we're alone. You're not alone. You are amongst friends. You are amongst family, people who are going through the same things you are. So thank you so much for joining us. Please tune in next week. We'll have another episode. Fabiano, once again, thank you so, so much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Have
Amy.
a
Appreciate you.
wonderful day.